Hi, I'm Keith B. Jones, the author of Building Generational Black Wealth, and I want to take a minute to welcome you to this documentary. Our goal is to take you on a journey in time and explore wealth building as it has affected the African American community since slavery. When I wrote the first Building Generational Black Wealth book back in 2003, I really didn't expect much response from it because up to that point, no one had ever touched on the subject of generational wealth as it relates to African Americans. The conversations were always centered around being rich, and that was generally by way of sports or having your own business. Little did I know that after the book's release, that it would start a huge dialogue in the home of African Americans about what they needed to do about building wealth, not only for themselves, but for their heirs as well. I turn on the television and literally hear pundits talking about the principles outlined in my book. Now, I didn't get much national recognition for my work because, well, sometimes that's the way things go. But I didn't necessarily write Building Generational Black Wealth to become wealthy or popular. I wrote it because I felt like it was necessary to help African Americans find their path to wealth. In 2006, I wrote the second edition to Building Generational Black Wealth and did a tour across the United States. And that's when I saw firsthand the impact of the first book. I had people coming up to me telling me how they followed the principles outlined in the first book and how they were teaching their kids about investing early. I was so inspired by their stories, I decided to film a documentary called Building Generational Black Wealth. Why was this book having such a positive effect on people? Honestly, I don't think it's because I'm the world's greatest writer. I really think that it's because African Americans want to learn not only how to build wealth, but to maintain wealth for generations to come. The question that I have for you is, why are you not wealthy? It may seem like a weird way to start off this documentary, but I want you to ask yourself this question as you watch it. Wealth building is not difficult, and there is information everywhere about wealth building, so why are you not wealthy? I promise that I'll answer this question at the end of the documentary, and who knows, you may have already found the answer by that time. Thank you for taking the time to watch Building Generational Black Wealth, the Resurrection documentary. I'll see you at the end of the film.
We all have heard about the horrors of slavery, about how some Africans were brought to the United States to work free of charge. Outside of the physical horrors that we read about for years, one thing that has never really been touched upon is how this has affected us generationally from a wealth building standpoint. One of the most negative effects that slavery had on African Americans is that it taught them how to depend on jobs from others, and by always desiring to be workers and not being able to become business owners, we have made others very wealthy. Think about it. If you could first enslave someone and then make them work without wages, you will build wealth very quickly. In order for you to maintain your wealth, all you will need to do is train the slaves' children to do the exact same thing. This process has affected African Americans generationally. Over time, as laws changed and the slaves were now paid a wage, it was a low wage and it made them become an indentured servant. For those of you who don't know what an indentured servant is, it means that an employee within the system of free labor who is bound by a contract or forced contract to work for a particular employee for a fixed time. The contract often lets the employee sell the labor of an indentured servant to a third party. At the compilation of the contract, the indentured servants were given their freedom and occasionally plots of land. So how has this affected us today? For generations, a lot of African Americans are caught up in low-paying jobs, and some of those African Americans actually have high-quality skills. However, they get stuck with lower wages and aren't able to have enough money to save for their children's education or for their retirement, and they are in effect teaching their kids to do the exact same thing. This is a cycle that a lot of people in general are caught in today. They have been generally taught to take whatever job is paying and accept it, which devalues their skills. There is a great likelihood that their children will do the exact same thing, and inadvertently teach their kids to do the same thing. This cycle has caused many African Americans to stay in poverty for generations. When I first heard Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, I was literally blown away by it. Now, in all fairness, Martin Luther King Jr. had a lot of great speeches, but this one in particular stood out to me because I kept hearing the word justice over and over. The older that I got, the more important I found that word to be, but not for the same reasons most people believe. I found out that justice is all part of the cycle of wealth. Creating generational wealth starts with us, becoming the masters of our own thinking. What you think of yourself and others plays a significant role in creating generational wealth. If you think negative thoughts, then you invite negativity into your life. If you think positive thoughts, then you invite positivity into your life. It's called the law of reciprocal relations. Once we master our own thinking, then we are able to have self-control. When we have self-control over our thinking, then we are not susceptible to overpowering wants and needs that trigger our instincts to overpower our intelligence. Remember that there is no wealth like intelligence and no poverty like ignorance. When we don't fall victims to these overpowering wants and needs, we can be assured that we can not only build, but maintain wealth. Keep in mind that even a person who lacks material wealth may gain that wealth by application of that intelligence, while the person who has wealth risks losing his wealth by not being able to apply intelligence. Now this brings us to justice. The root of justice is wealth. It is impossible to be happy without justice because of the friction and antagonism a just behavior creates. See, Dr. King was really on to something, because how can you build any wealth when that friction and antagonism brings insecurity, suspicion, and mistrust? People who are not successful are not respected, making it difficult for them to obtain justice, leaving them unable to protect themselves and others. So a reasonable degree of influence is necessary for security and justice. Economically, we're better off than what we were years ago, but the question of how we use our wealth is coming into question. If we only work to spend and spend whenever we earn, then there is no further progress. There must be some consideration given as to how we use our money. The issue of not spending money wisely is a generational problem for many African Americans, because it starts with not being able to fully participate in the consumer markets during slavery. Think about it. Imagine that you are a slave and you have nothing, but you see people with very nice clothes and homes. You have rags and live in a crowded shack. You want so badly to be able to own nice things, but cannot own anything. When you are able to own something, you will want the best, because you have already had the worst. Somehow, by owning the best means that you have accomplished something in your life, even if by owning it, you have financial problems. That is what we see some African Americans are doing today. Purchasing expensive items only to discover that they cannot afford them, and causing themselves and their children financial discomfort. But let's go back in time to better understand what was kept from African Americans to level the wealth building field. When we look at the stock market crashes, we typically see a lot of people who have lost a lot of money, which is always bad. But we seldom look at what happened as a result of the crash and how that affected African Americans. When the stock market crashed on October 24, 1929, known as Black Thursday, caused a lot of change in the economy. One of the things that was created was the Social Security system. It was a good idea because it would help people who had been working to have a retirement, or if they were disabled, they could have some money available. The problem for African Americans was that when President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law, it excluded farm workers and domestic workers, which were jobs held mostly by people of color. so there would be no benefits for them, just work. Now keep in mind that welfare is not supposed to be all that attractive anyway, but for African Americans it was horrible, because either they were flat out discriminated against, or the laws was written to keep them as indentured servants. To put that into perspective, they could mostly find farm jobs that already didn't pay well, and welfare was designed to pay less than the lowest paying jobs, which was the farm jobs already held by African Americans. So it was no benefit for them to take it. And then, to make matters worse, a lot of African Americans was heavily indebted to the person they worked for, so it was impossible for them to leave. The laws was basically designed to keep African Americans off of social services and keep them financially tied to the person they worked for. So when African Americans could get any type of public assistance, it was long overdue, and they jumped on it because it could stabilize their financial condition. Then the trap was to keep them on it because they couldn't earn a decent wage due to lack of education, and this has entrapped a lot of African Americans generationally. Think about it. If you go from being a slave to an indentured servant, plus have laws that limit where you can move and limit your access to programs designed to help you financially, how can you grow? The generational effects of what was done really showed up in the 1970s as more African Americans poured themselves up from poverty into the lower and middle classes. The problem was that some African Americans was doing well and others weren't, and this started an all-out war between the two sides. One claiming that the other needed to stop making excuses and get an education, and the other side saying that the odds were stacked against them and the opportunities weren't there for them. Which side was right? Both. There is some truth in that making excuses, and lack of education will stifle any growth potential that exists. But at the same time, every good opportunity doesn't exist for everyone, despite a positive attitude and an education. Which side of the fence was your family on? In the 1980s, there was a really big push for African Americans to get educated. So whichever side of the fence your family was on, education became a priority in both households. As with anything, there was a cost of trying to get ahead. The financial impact on both sides were pretty rough. For the person who was elected to go to college, some was saddled with debt from student loans. According to a report by the Department of Education, found that in 1992 and 1993, African American students defaulted on their loans 5 times faster than white or Asian students 10 years after graduation. What happened next can be devastating to building wealth. When you default on any obligations that's reported to the credit bureau, it's likely to have a negative impact on your credit score. When you have a lower credit score, it's likely that you are going to have to pay a higher interest rate for anything that you finance, if you are even able to get financing. To put that into perspective, let's say that you want to purchase a home. If you have excellent credit, you will pay the lowest interest rate. And if you have bad credit, you will be paying a higher interest rate. So for example, let's say that you are financing a 30-year, $200,000 mortgage. Since interest rates fluctuate, we'll say that the person with excellent credit is going to pay 3.875%, and the person with bad credit will pay 5.5%. Let's say that both people make a down payment of 3.5%. The difference is staggering. So the person with great credit is going to have an estimated monthly mortgage payment of $907.01 and will pay roughly $134,000 in interest over the life of the loan. The person with bad credit will have an estimated monthly mortgage payment of $1,093.83 and pay an estimated $202,000 over the life of the loan. That's a $68,000 difference over the life of the loan, which is money that could have been used to fund a retirement account or an education fund. The problem of paying too much interest has affected African Americans in the worst way, because our desires to go into these types of agreements put us at an automatic financial disadvantage. Remember when I said earlier that sometimes our instinct overpowers our intellect? This is a perfect example of how that happens, and it has affected a lot of African Americans because by entering these agreements, some African Americans put their retirement at risk, or they put their children's education at risk. It is nearly impossible to build and maintain wealth when you are always overpaying for something. Now, the person who never went to school may never earn enough money to become a homeowner, and they may be stuck renting a home or an apartment. According to statistics, people who don't complete their education may earn less than those who do. In 2015, it was estimated that college graduates earned 56% more than non-graduates. It was also found that the job market had dwindled for those without a college degree. We know that just because someone graduates from college, it doesn't guarantee a high-wage job. And conversely, we know that just because someone doesn't graduate from college, that they're doomed to low-wage positions. However, this provides some insights into how this all came to be in the first place. It starts generationally. The slave had no strategy that would work for them, so they had no options for building wealth. Going from a slave to an indentured servant didn't help at all, because it gave the illusion of freedom, but it never delivered. Going from an indentured servant to low-wage jobs still made it nearly impossible to build wealth. When you consider all of the laws that was enacted to slow the economic growth of African Americans, now that more opportunities exist, we must take our own wealth-building destiny in our own hands. If we are to be successful financially, we have to view everything as a strategy. We have to start looking at the real numbers behind our decisions. We have to get back to the basics and understand that your financial life is like a roller coaster, but with a good strategy, we can avoid many pitfalls. The very first thing that we have to do is to stop thinking that someone is coming to rescue us by providing an opportunity to solve whatever financial issue that we are facing at the time. When the stock market crashed again in 2002, a lot of people just weren't prepared, and that includes people of other ethnicities, and it totally destroyed them financially. The job market was horrible. It seemed like there were only a few good paying jobs available, and everyone seemed to be applying for it. Since bills were starting to pile up, people started taking whatever jobs they could get because unemployment had run out for most of them. This led people to lower paying jobs, which in turn created another problem. Since there were so many people out of work, businesses weren't paying much money, and people started to revolt because they were working full time and still couldn't afford to pay their bills. And when people can't pay their bills, it sends a ripple throughout the business community. If people don't have any money, they can't spend any money. And people spending money drives everything in our economy. What people was going through reminded me of what happened to the people in the 1980s. The interest rates were so high that it forced a lot of foreclosures, and people lost their families and everything they owned. It is said that history repeats itself, and for African Americans, we seem to be collectively the most vulnerable to economic downturns. What if there was a way to safeguard yourself from economic downturns? Remember at the beginning, I said that your financial life can be like a roller coaster. Roller coasters can be fun for some and scary for others, but the objective of a roller coaster is always the same, and that's to provide you with plenty of ups and downs, whether you expect them or not. When I first took a ride on a roller coaster, I was very excited when I was on my way to the top of the ride. Once I arrived at the top, it felt awesome to see everything. Then the roller coaster took off towards the bottom so fast, I hardly had a chance to prepare for it. The excitement was officially gone, and now I was becoming uneasy. When the roller coaster started back up, I felt so much pressure on my neck and back, and it actually felt very uncomfortable. Once I got back on top, I was fine, but I knew that this roller coaster had much more in store for me, with all of the twists and turns. This is when I realized that this is how most people's financial life works. It is full of ups and downs. I started asking myself, how can you protect yourself when most of the things that may go wrong may not be your fault? My thought is that you have to have a strategy going forward if you are to build and maintain wealth. In order to accomplish this goal, you must first look at Newton's 3 laws of motion. Yes, Sir Isaac Newton's law of motion can help you build and maintain wealth if you understand its basic principles. Newton's first law states that every object will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line, unless compelled to change its state by the action of an external force. The second law explains how the velocity of an object changes when it is subjected to an external force. The third law states that for every action force in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. To make all of this make better sense, I want you to imagine that you are on a financial roller coaster. Let's say that you are offered a job that pays a good wage, so you are no longer at rest. You are now in motion, heading to the top of the roller coaster. How fast you arrive at the top is subjected to how much you are earning and how smart you work. Once you are on top, the same rules apply again. You can stay on top until forced to change by an external force such as losing your job or mismanaging the opportunity. This can start a downward motion. How quickly you fall to the bottom will depend on how well you are prepared for the downturn. How well you prepare yourself will determine how long you stay on the bottom and how fast you rise back to the top. Whereas I like Sir Isaac Newton's law of motion, I realize that most people are not physics majors, and so simply put, we have to do things that make sense to keep us in a position that we cannot be easily affected by external forces. If we are to stay on top, then we have to spend our money wisely and save a great portion of our money. Then we have to invest our money wisely and safely to ensure future growth. We have to educate our children on money so that they understand the importance of spending wisely and investing. By doing these things, we can safeguard ourselves from being negatively affected by economic downturns. And here's why. If we have spent wisely, then we have money saved. If we have invested our money, then we are likely to have more money than originally invested. Let me be very clear that the stock market isn't the only investment that you can make. You can invest in your own business or through your life insurance. The options are endless. If your children are doing the same thing, then they are not likely to be a financial burden on the parents and vice versa. This means that the money that you have is being depleted faster by trying to save someone else from financial devastation. Imagine that things in the economy have taken a turn. But this time, you and your family are financially prepared. How different would things be?
I don't know where you are in life right now. You may be doing very well financially, or you may not be doing well at all, but you have the power to change your circumstances at any time. If you're doing well at this time, don't get too comfortable, because you'll soon find out that maintaining wealth can be just as challenging as building wealth. question that I had for you at the beginning of the documentary was, why are you not wealthy? I promised that I'd answer that question, and I'm going to do so right now. You may not be wealthy because generationally, your family has never learned how to build wealth. You may have only been taught to be a consumer. Some people feel that the more that they can acquire, that somehow that makes them wealthy, and it doesn't. In all actuality, that person may be at greater risk of financial collapse because they have more to lose. As I said earlier, there's no poverty like ignorance. The definition of ignorance is to lack knowledge or information. So your own ignorance will prevent you from being wealthy. True wealth comes from knowledge. With knowledge, you can build wealth. With knowledge, you can maintain wealth. With ignorance, you can make other people wealthy. With ignorance, you can be unprepared for financial emergencies. With ignorance, you may have in fact doomed your future generations to poverty. It's time for you to take control of your household at all costs, because building and maintaining wealth is greater than your desire to purchase expensive cars and homes so that you can somehow feel important to other people who truly do not care if you own them or not. It's time for you to take control of your children's destiny, because it's in your hands. Will you heed the call to financial freedom and go from ignorance to knowledge? Will you lead you and your family to a financial resurrection?